The clock showed 3 in the morning when Jake Morrison walked through the lower decks of the Starship Horizon's Edge. His boots made soft sounds on the metal floor as he checked each corridor and door. This was his job every night, making sure everything was safe and normal while most of the crew slept in their beds. Jake had been doing these patrol walks for 2 years now. He knew every corner of this ship, every sound it made, every smell in the recycled air. Tonight felt the same as any other night until he turned the corner near the maintenance area and saw something odd on the floor. He stopped walking and bent down to look closer. There were tiny marks on the shiny metal floor like little footprints. They were small, much smaller than a human baby's foot. The prints looked wet and reflected his flashlight. Jake touched one mark with his finger and sniffed it. Engine coolant. Someone or something had walked through spilled coolant and was now leaving a trail through his ship. His heart started beating faster. This was not normal. Nothing should be walking around the ship at this hour except the crew members on duty. And these prints were far too small to be from any crew member he knew. Jake pressed the button on his communicator. Morrison to bridge. I found strange footprints on Deck 7, Section 12. They look like small animal tracks, requesting permission to follow them and investigate. A woman's voice answered right away. It was Commander Lisa Hayes who was running the bridge during the night shift. Permission granted, Morrison. Keep your radio on and tell us what you find. Be careful. Yes, Commander, Jake said. He stood up and started following the trail of tiny prints. They went down the corridor, past the crew sleeping quarters, and toward the elevator that went between the different levels of the ship. The Horizon's Edge was currently parked next to Kepler Station, a big space station where ships stopped to refuel and rest. 3 days ago, aliens had come aboard for the first time. They were called Virelians, and they looked like cats that walked on 2 legs. They had golden fur, big green eyes, and spoken voices that sounded musical, even through the translation computers. The ship's mission was to protect them and help with the first meetings between humans and Virelians. Jake wondered if these prints belonged to the Virelians, but he had met them when they came aboard, and they were not this small. Adult Virelians were about 4 feet tall. These prints were tiny, like they came from something no bigger than his hand. The trail led him to the elevator. Jake pressed the button and waited. When the doors opened, he stepped inside and looked at the floor. Yes, there they were again, more tiny prints heading toward the button panel. He looked up and saw small wet marks on the panel itself. Whatever made these prints had climbed up to press the buttons. Jake felt a strange mix of worry and curiosity. He pressed the button for Deck 6 and watched as the elevator rose. When the doors opened, he saw the trail continue down the hallway. He followed it, his flashlight moving back and forth across the floor. The prints went past the medical bay, past the storage rooms, and toward another elevator. Up again. Deck 5, then Deck 4, then Deck 3. Whatever was making these prints was climbing through the ship, going higher and higher. Morrison to bridge, Jake said into his communicator. The trail is leading upward. Currently on Deck 3 and still following. Understood, Commander Hayes replied. Do you see whatever is making the tracks? Negative. Just the footprints. They're getting harder to see because the coolant is drying up, but I can still follow them. Keep us informed. Hayes out. Jake continued his search. The prints led him through the science section, where all the laboratories and research rooms were located. He passed windows showing the darkness of space outside, stars scattered like sand on black cloth. The ship was quiet except for the usual humming of the engines and life support systems. On Deck 2, the trail became very faint. Jake had to use his flashlight carefully, moving it at different angles to catch the last traces of coolant on the floor. He worried he might lose the trail completely. But then he saw it again, leading to the stairs that went to Deck 1. Deck 1 was where the bridge was located. The bridge was the most important room on the ship, where the captain and officers controlled everything. It had the best security, the strongest doors, and constant monitoring. Nothing should be able to get in there without permission. Jake climbed the stairs slowly, his flashlight showing him the way. The prints were barely visible now, just the faintest marks, but they definitely led to the bridge door. He stood in front of it, looking down at the floor, then up at the security panel. The door was closed and locked, as it should be. But the tiny prints went right underneath it, disappearing into the bridge. Jake took a deep breath. He pressed his hand against the security panel, and it scanned his fingerprints. The door made a soft beeping sound and slid open. He stepped inside. The bridge was dark except for the glow of computer screens and control panels. 2 crew members were on duty. Peter Cole sat at the communications station, and Amy Brooks was at the sensor controls. They both turned to look at Jake with surprised faces. "Jake?" Amy said. "What are you doing here? Is something wrong?" "I'm following a trail," Jake said. He moved his flashlight across the floor, searching for the prints. "Have either of you seen or heard anything strange tonight? Any small animals or unusual sounds?" Peter shook his head. "No, it's been completely quiet." "Why, what's going on?" Jake didn't answer right away. He was focused on finding the trail. There, near the captain's chair, he saw another small print. It led toward the back of the bridge where the emergency equipment was stored. He walked carefully, not wanting to disturb anything. The emergency equipment area had lockers for spacesuits, helmets, oxygen tanks, and other survival gear. There was a special rack where the bridge crew kept their helmets, a metal shelf with slots for each helmet to sit in. Jake noticed that the small access panel at the bottom of the helmet rack was open just a crack. He knelt down and listened. From inside the rack, he heard the softest sound. A tiny squeak, then another, then a gentle chittering noise like birds talking to each other. Jake set his flashlight down and slowly opened the access panel wider. He looked inside and his eyes went wide with surprise. Inside the helmet rack, curled up together in a small nest, were 4 tiny creatures. They had golden fur that looked soft and fuzzy like dandelions. Their ears were too big for their heads and their eyes were closed in sleep. They were babies, no doubt about it. Virelian cubs. Jake stared at them, barely breathing. The cubs were sleeping peacefully, piled on top of each other like puppies. Someone had made them a nest using cloth napkins from the dining hall. The napkins were arranged carefully to make a soft, warm bed. One of the cubs yawned, showing teeth no bigger than grains of rice, then snuggled closer to its brothers or sisters. "Oh, my stars," Amy whispered. She had come over to see what Jake found. "Where did they come from?" "The Virelian quarters are on deck 4, Jake said quietly. He didn't want to wake the sleeping cubs. They must have escaped somehow and climbed all the way up here. Peter joined them, looking over Jake's shoulder. "How is that possible?" "They're so small. How could they get through all the locked doors and security?" Jake thought about the trail he had followed. They used the maintenance ducts, the ventilation shafts. Small spaces we never thought something living would fit through. They're clever little things. The cubs continued sleeping, completely unaware that 3 humans were watching them. Their tiny chests moved up and down with each breath. One of them had its paw resting on another's head. They looked so peaceful and safe in their stolen nest. "What do we do?" Amy asked. "Should we wake them? Move them?" "No," Jake said firmly. "We don't touch them. We need to contact the Virelian delegation first. These babies belong to someone, and that someone is probably very worried right now." He stood up and walked to the communications panel. "Morrison to Commander Hayes, I found what made the tracks. You need to see this. Also, please contact the Virelian delegation immediately. Tell them we found their cubs." There was a pause before Hayes responded. "Their cubs?" "Morrison, explain. 4 Virelian babies are sleeping in the bridge helmet rack, Commander. They're safe and unharmed, but we need their parents here right away." Another pause, longer this time. "Stay where you are. I'm coming down, and I'll wake the Virelian ambassador." Jake returned to the helmet rack and sat on the floor nearby, keeping watch over the sleeping cubs. Amy and Peter went back to their stations but kept glancing over at the unexpected visitors. "They're actually kinda cute," Peter said. "I mean in a weird alien way." "They're babies," Amy said. "All babies are cute. That's how nature makes sure adults take care of them." Jake smiled. She was probably right. Looking at the cubs, he felt a strong urge to protect them. They were so small and helpless. Even though they were aliens from another world, they were still children who needed care and safety. He thought about how scared they must have been, lost in a huge starship full of strange sounds and smells. They probably cried for their mother. They probably felt alone and frightened, so they did what baby animals do. They looked for the safest place they could find. "The bridge," Jake said out loud. "What?" Amy asked. They came to the bridge because it felt safe. The bridge is warm from all the equipment. It has the smell of many crew members from the helmets. To lost cubs, this would seem like the center of the colony, the heart of the family, the safest spot on the whole ship. Peter nodded slowly. "That actually makes sense. My cat back home always sleeps in my closet where all my clothes are. She says it smells like me and makes her feel protected." Exactly, Jake said. These cubs were lost and scared, so they climbed as high as they could go until they found a spot that felt safe. Then they made a nest and went to sleep waiting for help. The bridge doors opened and Commander Hayes walked in, followed by Captain Greg Hoffman. The captain was a big man with gray hair and a serious face, but his eyes looked kind. He walked straight to the helmet rack and looked down at the sleeping cubs. "Well," he said softly, "this is a first." "Yes, sir," Jake said. "I tracked them from Deck 7. They used maintenance ducts and ventilation shafts to climb through the ship." "Resourceful little things," the captain said. He knelt down beside Jake, looking at the cubs more closely. "They can't be more than a few weeks old. Look at how fuzzy their fur is. And their eyes are barely open." One of the cubs stirred in its sleep, making a small mewing sound. The captain smiled slightly. "They certainly picked a good spot. The helmet rack is probably the warmest, darkest place on the bridge." "Smart babies," Captain Commander Hayes said. "The Virelian ambassador is on his way. He sounded very distressed when I told him we found cubs on our bridge." "I bet he did," Captain Hoffman said. "This is a diplomatic situation now. We need to handle it carefully. These aren't just baby animals. They're the children of our guests, and we need to treat this with respect." The doors opened again, and Ambassador Keyleth rushed in. The Virelian ambassador was taller than most of his people, almost 5 feet high. His golden fur was perfectly groomed, and he wore a blue diplomatic robe. But right now his whiskers were trembling and his tail was moving back and forth in agitation. "Captain Hoffman," Keyleth said in his accented English. The translation device on his collar made his words clear. "I apologize deeply for this intrusion. We did not know the younglings had left our quarters. Their mother has been searching everywhere. We thought they were hiding in our rooms." "Ambassador," the captain said calmly, "please come look. They're sleeping peacefully. They're not hurt or distressed." Keyleth approached the helmet rack carefully. When he saw the 4 cubs nestled together, his whole body relaxed. His ears, which had been flat against his head, lifted up. "Oh, thank the stars. They are safe." "How did they get out?" Jake asked. "Don't your quarters have locks?" "They do," Keyleth said sadly. "But Virelian cubs are very clever when they want to be. They can open simple latches with their paws. We should have told you this when we came aboard. We should have asked for special secure rooms. This is our fault, not yours." Captain Hoffman stood up. "Ambassador, I think we share the responsibility here. We should have asked if you needed special accommodations for traveling with young ones. But what's important now is that they're safe. They chose well. The bridge is the most protected location on this ship." Keyleth looked at the sleeping cubs, then at the humans around him. In Virelian culture, when cubs seek the heart of a colony and find safety there, it means something important. It creates a bond of trust. Your crew member found them but did not harm them. He protected them and called for help. This speaks well of humanity, Captain. We would never hurt children, Jake said, no matter what planet they come from. The ambassador's eyes met Jake's and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe? Or respect? I believe you, Lieutenant. And I will remember this. The sound of quick footsteps came from outside, and a female Virelian rushed through the door. The female Virelian who rushed onto the bridge was clearly the mother of the sleeping cubs. Her name was Counselor Priya, and Jake remembered meeting her when the delegation first came aboard. She was smaller than the ambassador, with golden fur that had white patches around her face. Right now her fur was standing up in all directions and her whiskers were trembling. Her eyes were wide with fear and worry. She stopped when she saw all the humans standing near the helmet rack. Her breathing was fast and her ears kept moving, listening for any sound from her babies. She looked at Captain Hoffman, then at Ambassador Keyleth. Are they? She started to say, but her voice broke. She tried again. Are my cubs safe? Please tell me they are safe. They're perfectly safe, Counselor, Captain Hoffman said gently. They're sleeping right here. Would you like to see them? Priya moved forward slowly, as if she was afraid of what she might find. But when she reached the helmet rack and looked inside at her 4 sleeping babies, she made a sound that needed no translation. It was the sound of a mother who had been terrified and was now flooded with relief. A soft cry mixed with a purr, a sound of pure love and thankfulness. She reached toward the cubs but then stopped. She looked at Captain Hoffman with tears in her large eyes. Captain, I request permission to retrieve my children. I take full responsibility for their escape. They are quick and clever, but I should have watched them better. I should have made our quarters more secure. This is my failure as a mother. Jake felt his heart squeeze in his chest. He could hear the pain and guilt in her voice. She was blaming herself for something that any parent could understand. Children were curious. They explored. They got into trouble. That was what children did, no matter what species they belonged to. "Counselor Priya," the captain said, and his voice was warm and kind. "You have permission to get your cubs. And please don't blame yourself. We should have asked if you needed special rooms for traveling with babies. This is partially our fault too. We've never had Virelian guests before, so we didn't know what you might need." Priya looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. She turned back to the helmet rack and carefully reached inside. Her movements were slow and gentle. She picked up the first cub, cradling it against her chest. The baby made a small sound but didn't wake up. She picked up the second cub, then the third, then the fourth. She held all 4 of them against her body, and they fit perfectly there like puzzle pieces finding their right places. The cubs began to purr in their sleep, a soft rumbling sound. They knew their mother's smell, her warmth, her heartbeat. They were home again, even though they were still on the bridge of a human starship. "In our culture," Priya said softly, her voice thick with emotion, "there is an old belief. When cubs leave the family nest and find safety in another place, and when that place welcomes them without harm, it creates a sacred bond. The place that protects lost cubs becomes family. Do you understand what I am saying?" Ambassador Khalith stepped forward. "Captain Hoffman, Counselor Priya is explaining something very important to our people. Her cubs were lost and frightened. They climbed through your ship looking for safety. They found your bridge, the most important place on your vessel, and they made a nest there. Your crew member discovered them but did not disturb them. He did not hurt them or scare them. Instead, he protected them and called for help. This act of kindness means something deep to us." Captain Hoffman looked at Jake, then back at the ambassador. "We would do the same for any child, Ambassador. Human children, Virelian children, any children. Protecting the young is not just a human value. I think it's a universal value. Something all good people share no matter where they come from." Priya made that purring, crying sound again. "You are right, Captain. And this is why I believe our 2 species can be friends. Because we both understand that children are precious. We both understand that they must be protected. This is the foundation of everything good in the universe." One of the cubs yawned and opened its eyes. The eyes were bright green like emeralds. The cub looked around at all the tall figures surrounding it, both human and Virelian. It didn't seem scared. Instead, it made a happy chirping sound and snuggled back against its mother. "They seem very calm," Amy said from her station. "After everything they went through, I thought they would be more frightened." "Cubs are resilient," Ambassador Khalith explained. "They trust that adults will keep them safe. These 4 were lost, yes. They were probably scared when they were traveling through your ship, but then they found a warm, safe place and went to sleep. Now their mother is here, so everything is right in their world again. They don't hold on to fear the way adults do." Jake thought about that. It was a nice way to live, trusting that everything would be okay, trusting that someone would always come to help. Human children were like that too when they were very young. Maybe all children were. "Captain," Ambassador Khalith said, "I would like to make a proposal. I think we should include this incident in our cultural exchange documentation, not as an embarrassment or a failure, but as an example of how our 2 species can coexist peacefully. Your crew protected Virelian young as if they were human children. That is the kind of action that builds real friendship between worlds." Captain Hoffman thought about this for a moment. Jake could see him considering all the angles, all the possible consequences. Then the captain nodded. "I agree, Ambassador. This should be remembered. Not as a security breach or a diplomatic problem, but as something good. As proof that we can take care of each other." He turned to Jake. "Lieutenant Morrison, you did excellent work tonight. You found the cubs, you kept them safe, and you handled this situation with common sense and compassion. That's exactly the kind of officer we need on this ship." Jake felt his face get warm. "Thank you, sir. I just did what anyone would do." "No," Priya said, looking at him while holding her cubs. "Not everyone would have been so gentle. Not everyone would have understood that these were frightened babies who needed help. You saw them as children first, not as aliens or as a problem to solve. That is the mark of a good person, Lieutenant Morrison." "The counselor is right," Ambassador Khalith said. "Lieutenant, you have earned the respect of the Virelian people today. We will remember your name and your actions." Jake didn't know what to say. He had just been doing his job, following a trail of tiny footprints through the ship. He never expected it would turn into something important. But looking at Priya holding her cubs, seeing the gratitude in her eyes, he felt good about how things had turned out. "If I may make a suggestion, Captain," Commander Hayes said. She had been quiet during most of this, but now she stepped forward. "We should modify our guest quarters to be more secure for families traveling with young ones. We should also create new protocols for hosting aliens who might have different needs than adult humans. This was a learning experience for all of us." "Excellent idea, Commander," Captain Hoffman said. "Make it happen. From now on, any visiting delegation with children gets specialized quarters with proper security and environmental controls. We don't want any more midnight adventures through the ship, no matter how well they turn out." Priya bowed her head slightly, a gesture of respect in Varelian culture. "Thank you, Captain." "Thank you all. You have given me back the most precious things in my life. I will never forget this kindness." She turned to leave, carrying her cubs carefully. Ambassador Keyleth followed her. But at the door, the ambassador stopped and looked back at the humans on the bridge. "Captain Hoffman," Ambassador Keyleth said, standing at the bridge doorway, "there is something else I would like to discuss with you. Something that this incident has made me think about very carefully." The captain nodded. "Of course, Ambassador. Would you like to talk now, or should we schedule a formal meeting?" "Now would be good if you have time," Keyleth said. "What happened tonight is important. It shows something about humans that we needed to see." Priya had already left with the cubs, escorted by security officers who would make sure she got back to her quarters safely. The bridge was quiet again, with just the usual sounds of the ship's systems humming in the background. Captain Hoffman gestured to his office, a small room attached to the bridge. "Let's talk in private," the captain said. "Commander Hayes, you have the bridge. Lieutenant Morrison, please join us. This concerns you too." Jake felt surprised but followed the captain and the ambassador into the office. The room was simple, with a desk, some chairs, and a large window showing the stars outside. They all sat down, and Ambassador Keyleth looked at both humans with his large, intelligent eyes. "When my people first decided to make contact with humans," Keyleth began, "we were very careful. We studied your species for many years before we approached you. We watched your broadcasts, learned your languages, and tried to understand your culture. We saw many good things, but we also saw violence and war. We saw humans fighting each other over small differences. This made us worried." Captain Hoffman listened without interrupting. Jake did the same, though he felt a bit uncomfortable hearing these things about his own species. "We wondered," Keyleth continued, "if humans could be trusted, if you could be peaceful, if you could accept beings who were different from you. These are important questions when deciding whether to make contact with a new species." "Those are fair concerns," Captain Hoffman said. "Humans have made many mistakes in our history. We've hurt each other and damaged our world. We're not perfect. No species is perfect," Keyleth said. "But tonight, something happened that answered many of our questions. 4 Virelian cubs got lost on your ship. They were completely helpless, completely vulnerable. Your crew member found them, and what did he do? He protected them. He didn't see them as strange creatures or as threats. He saw them as children who needed help. That tells me something very important about humans." Jake felt his face get warm again. "I just did what seemed right, Ambassador." "Exactly," Keyleth said, leaning forward. "You did what seemed right. You didn't have to think about it or calculate the diplomatic consequences. Your first instinct was to protect the cubs. That instinct, Lieutenant Morrison, is what we look for in potential friends and allies, not just intelligence or technology or military strength. We look for compassion. We look for the ability to care about others, even others who are very different from you." The ambassador turned to Captain Hoffman. "And you, Captain, when you saw the cubs, you immediately understood their need. You did not get angry about the security breach. You did not blame Counselor Priya for losing her children. Instead, you took responsibility and talked about how to prevent this from happening again. You showed leadership and kindness at the same time." "Ambassador Keyleth," the captain said slowly, "are you saying that this incident has changed how your people view humans?" "Yes," Keyleth said simply. "Before tonight, we were still deciding whether to recommend a full alliance between our worlds. The diplomatic meetings were going well, but there were still doubts among our council members. Some Virelians believed humans were too aggressive, too unpredictable, but now I can tell them a story that will change their minds." "The story of the cubs in the helmet rack," Jake said. "Yes," Keyleth said, his whiskers twitching, and what Jake was learning was a Virelian smile. "The story of how 4 lost cubs climbed through a human starship, found the most important room, made a nest, and fell asleep. And how the humans who found them treated them with gentleness and respect. This story will spread through my world, Lieutenant. Cubs are sacred to us. Anyone who protects cubs, who shows them kindness, is someone we can trust completely. Captain Hoffman sat back in his chair, looking thoughtful. So you're saying that this incident, which could have been a diplomatic disaster, actually helped our case? Very much so, Khalith said. In fact, I am prepared to recommend to my government that we move forward with a full alliance treaty. I believe humans and Virelians can work together well. I believe we share the same core values, the same respect for life and family, and I believe our children will grow up in a better galaxy because our species chose to be friends. Jake felt something swell in his chest, pride maybe, or hope. He thought about those 4 tiny cubs, sleeping peacefully in the helmet rack, completely unaware that they were helping to build a bridge between 2 worlds. Sometimes the most important moments in history came from the smallest events. There is one more thing, Keyleth said. I would like your permission to bring the cubs back to visit the bridge one more time before we leave your ship. Not secretly this time, but officially. I want them to see this place in the daylight, to meet the crew members who protected them. I want them to remember as they grow up that humans were kind to them when they were helpless. Children remember these things even if they cannot speak about them clearly. I think that's a wonderful idea, Captain Hoffman said. We would be honored to host them. And Ambassador, I have a request of my own. I would like to create a small memorial to this event. Nothing big or fancy, just a simple plaque to put near the helmet rack. Something to remind our crew that we can make a difference in unexpected ways. Something to remind us that every action we take represents all of humanity to those who are watching. Khalith's ears lifted in pleasure. That would be very meaningful, Captain. May I suggest that the plaque include words in both English and Virelian, to show that we are learning from each other, sharing our languages and our ideas? Perfect, the captain said. I'll have it made right away. They talked for a while longer about the formal details of the continued negotiations, about schedules and meetings and treaties. But Jake's mind kept going back to the image of those 4 sleeping cubs, curled up together in their makeshift nest. He thought about how far they had traveled through the ship, how determined they must have been to find safety. He thought about how trust could be built through simple acts of kindness. When the meeting ended and Jake returned to his regular duties, he found himself walking differently through the ship. He looked at the corridors and doors with new eyes, imagining tiny cubs climbing through them, searching for warmth and protection. He thought about how the ship must have seemed to them, a huge metal cave full of strange sounds and smells. The story spread through the crew quickly, as stories always did on a ship. By breakfast time, everyone knew about the cubs in the helmet rack. Some people thought it was funny. Others thought it was sweet. But everyone agreed it was special, something worth remembering. Jake finished his patrol shift and went to his quarters to sleep. But before he lay down, he looked out his small window at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there was the Virelian homeworld, a planet full of beings who looked like cats and valued their children above everything else. Soon humans and Virelians would be official allies. And it all started because 4 brave little cubs went on an adventure and found exactly what they were looking for. Safety, warmth, protection. The things all children need, no matter what world they come from. The things all good people try to provide, no matter what challenges they face. Jake smiled and closed his eyes. It had been a very long night, but it had been a good one. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new chances to do the right thing. But tonight, 4 cubs were sleeping safely with their mother, and 2 species were one step closer to friendship. That was enough. That was more than enough. 2 weeks passed since the night Jake Morrison found the cubs sleeping in the helmet rack. Life on the horizon's edge continued as normal, but something had changed. The crew walked with more awareness now, more understanding that they were part of something bigger than just a ship doing its job. They were ambassadors for all humanity, and every action mattered. The story of the cubs spread beyond the ship. It traveled to Kepler Station, where other crews heard about it and smiled. It was sent back to Earth in official reports, where it was shared on news broadcasts and social media. People across the planet talked about the brave little cubs who climbed through a starship and the humans who protected them. It became a symbol of hope, a reminder that different species could care for each other. The plaque that Captain Hoffman promised was installed 3 days after the incident. It hung on the wall just above the helmet rack, made of polished metal with words carved in both English and Virelian script. Jake stood in front of it during his shift, reading the words again even though he had already memorized them. Site of first interspecies nap time. May all who seek safety find it here. Below that, in smaller letters, it said, on this date, 4 Virelian cubs found shelter and protection in this place. Let this mark the beginning of friendship between species. Jake touched the plaque gently. It felt good to have this reminder, something permanent to mark what had happened. Future crew members would see it and ask questions. They would hear the story and maybe understand that diplomacy wasn't just about treaties and formal meetings. Sometimes it was about tiny footprints and sleeping babies and doing the right thing when no one was watching. The Virelian delegation did come back to visit the bridge, just as Ambassador Keyleth had requested. Counselor Priya brought her 4 cubs, now a bit bigger and much more active than they had been that night. The cubs were curious about everything, their big eyes looking at all the screens and buttons with wonder. They chittered and squeaked, and their mother had to keep redirecting them when they tried to touch things they shouldn't. The crew gathered to meet them properly this time. Amy Brooks brought treats from the dining hall, small pieces of fruit that the cubs could safely eat. Peter Cole showed them how the communication system worked, letting them hear their own voices played back through the speakers. The cubs found this hilarious and made silly sounds just to hear them repeated. Captain Hoffman gave them a special tour, explaining in simple words what each station on the bridge did. The cubs probably didn't understand most of it, but they seemed to enjoy the attention. One of them, the smallest with a white spot on her forehead, kept returning to the helmet rack. She would peek inside, as if remembering that this was the place where she had felt safe. She remembers, Priya said softly to Jake, who was standing nearby. Cubs have good memories for places that gave them comfort. She will carry this feeling with her for her whole life. When she grows up and someone asks her about humans, she will remember this ship, this room, and the safety she felt here. I'm glad, Jake said. I hope she only has good memories of us. She will, Priya assured him, because you gave her good memories to keep. Ambassador Keyleth made a short speech that day, standing in the center of the bridge with all the humans and Virelians gathered around him. He talked about bridges between worlds, about trust and friendship, about how small moments could have big meanings. He officially announced that his government had approved moving forward with a full alliance treaty. The humans of this ship showed us who you truly are, Keyleth said, not through weapons or technology or grand gestures, but through simple kindness to 4 lost children. That is the foundation we want to build our alliance on. Compassion, understanding, the shared belief that all children deserve protection and all people deserve respect. The crew applauded, and the cubs made happy noises, not understanding the words but feeling the positive energy in the room. It was a good moment, a moment that Jake knew he would remember for the rest of his life. Before the Virelians left the ship for the last time, Ambassador Keyleth presented Captain Hoffman with a gift. It was a woven tapestry, created by Virelian artists in just 2 weeks. The tapestry showed the story of the cubs from their perspective, tiny figures climbing through a vast ship, searching for safety. At the center of the tapestry was the bridge, drawn with golden threads with the helmet rack glowing like a beacon. At the bottom of the tapestry were words in Virelian, with an English translation sewn beside them. Where the young sleep safely, there is the true heart of civilization. The captain accepted the gift with obvious emotion. This will hang on our bridge, he said, right here where everyone can see it. It will remind us of our responsibility and our privilege. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for trusting us with your children and with your friendship. The tapestry was hung that same day, right above the helmet rack and below the plaque. It became another piece of the story, another layer of meaning. Crew members would stop to look at it during their shifts, tracing the journey of the cubs with their eyes, thinking about what it all meant. Jake was given a new assignment after the Virelian delegation left. Captain Hoffman made him the ship's official liaison for visiting families from any species. His job was to make sure guest quarters were properly prepared, that safety measures were in place, and that any special needs were understood and met. It was a new position, created because of what happened with the cubs. You handled this situation with wisdom and compassion, Captain Hoffman told him. Those are exactly the qualities we need when dealing with families from other worlds. You showed that you can see beyond the surface differences and recognize the universal needs that all beings share. That's a rare skill, Lieutenant. Jake accepted the assignment with pride and some nervousness. It was a big responsibility, but he felt ready for it. He had learned something important that night when he followed the tiny footprints through the ship. He had learned that doing the right thing didn't require special training or complex protocols. It just required paying attention, caring about others, and acting with kindness. The Horizon's Edge left Kepler Station a few days later, heading toward new missions and new adventures. But the story of the Cubs stayed with the ship. New crew members who joined later would hear about it. They would look at the plaque and the tapestry and ask questions. The older crew members would tell them the story, adding their own details and memories. Years later, the incident would be taught at the academy where new officers trained. It became a case study in first contact situations, an example of how cultural understanding could develop from unexpected events. Instructors would ask their students what they would have done in Lieutenant Morrison's place. They would discuss the decisions made that night and the consequences that followed. But for Jake, it was never just a case study or a historical event. It was a real night when he found 4 scared babies and made sure they were safe. It was the night he learned that the smallest actions could have the biggest impacts. It was the night he understood that representing humanity meant more than following rules and procedures. It meant seeing others as people, as families, as beings who wanted the same things all beings want: safety, love, a place to belong. The tiny footprints had been cleaned from the corridors long ago. The coolant was wiped away, the floors polished until they shined again. But the mark left by those footprints remained. It remained in the hearts of the crew members who witnessed it. It remained in the friendship between humans and Varelians that grew stronger every year. It remained in the way humans approached other species, with more openness and less fear. Sometimes Jake would stand on the bridge during his shift and look at the helmet rack. He would remember the soft sound of cubs sleeping, the relief on Counselor Priya's face, the hope in Ambassador Kalith's eyes. He would touch the plaque gently and feel grateful that he had been there that night, that he had been the one to follow those tiny prints. The universe was vast and full of unknown species, unknown cultures, unknown possibilities. Humans were still new to the larger galactic community, still learning how to be good neighbors and reliable friends. But stories like this one gave everyone hope that it could be done, that different species could find common ground and build something beautiful together. 4 cubs had once climbed through a starship looking for safety. They found it in the most important room, surrounded by beings they had never seen before, protected by people who had every reason to see them as strange, but chose to see them as children instead. That simple act of protection had rippled outward like waves in a pond, touching more lives than anyone could count. And so the story lived on. It was told on Earth and on the Virelian homeworld. It was told on other ships and other stations. It was told to children of both species, a bedtime story about bravery and kindness and the power of doing what was right. The patrol had followed tiny prints to the bridge. The cubs had napped in the human's helmet rack, and in doing so, they had left footprints of a different kind, footprints that would never fade, footprints that marked the path toward a better future for everyone. Jake Morrison smiled as he finished his shift and prepared to head to his